my answer to this question follows very much from the comments I just made. Economics of it. Let me begin that again. Economics alone, whether we're talking about economics as an academic discipline or economics as policy, economics alone cannot accomplish any of these things. It's only economics and the way we think about the role of the market in relationship to societal principles, values, and aspirations, in relation to the rule of law, in relation to democratic institutions, in relationship to charters of rights. It's only in the context of those relationships that we can even begin to answer these questions. And so, you raised in your question, for example, on the one hand, climate change, on the other hand, technology in society. And these are two good examples of what I mean. In both cases, our civilization right now, our global civilization right now, is suffering under the tragic consequences of the failure of these nesting principles, of the disconnection between economics, capitalism, and society. So in the case of climate, that disconnection has produced a tragedy of the commons, where our earthly environment is being destroyed. Life on Earth, as we know it, is being destroyed.
Yeah.
And this has been allowed to occur on the strength of an ideology of market freedom, of radical market freedom, an ideology that twists itself around in order to declare the legitimacy of these kinds of harms being treated as off-balance sheet externalities, the unfortunate but necessary collateral damage of profit maximization. And the idea that we would have an economics that serves our societies in which the destruction of the earth is simply an unfortunate byproduct is a bizarre and irrational and deeply ahuman idea. So obviously, these fatal divisions between economics, ideology, and society have cost us everything. And that's why I think there are more and more of us who are of the mind that these divisions cannot stand. They will not take us into the future if we all expect to live and live on this planet. But I can make a similar case for the issues of technology in society. As you know, I've written about what I call surveillance capitalism.
Yeah.
And this is a form of data capitalism, which has become dominant in the 21st century. And rather than producing a tragedy of the commons, surveillance capitalism has produced a tragedy of the uncommons. And by that I mean spheres of life that we have treated as public. And that every single day, people log into Google or log onto Facebook or any of the other platforms or any of the other digitally connected information and communication spaces that we have all become dependent upon. thinking that they're entering some kind of public space, some kind of free space where they can speak and their speech will be translated as they intend. But that's not what's occurring, because our information and communication spaces in the digital realm have become owned and operated by private surveillance capital under the aegis of a market privileging ideology. We refer to it in shorthand, neoliberalism, and so forth, that have dominated the last 5 decades during the period of time, of course, when the internet and the World Wide Web were invented and eventually engulfed all of our information and communication activities. So, so this has become a tragedy of the uncommons, where we can no longer participate in social life, in economic life, in political life, without being marched through the institutional terrain of surveillance economics and its very pernicious and anti-democratic operations. So here we have tragedies of the shared space, tragedies of the now private space, and both the physical manifestation of our shared life together and the digital manifestation of our shared life together are under mortal threat. And these have undermined life itself and undermined certainly the prospects of democracy in the 21st century. So these are world historic failures that I place on this fatal disconnect between economic logics and their mechanisms, the ideologies that hold them, and the societies that we have always counted upon to hold those ideologies, to temper their radical instincts, their destructive instincts, and to tether them to the principles and aspirations of a democratic society. So as depressing as this is and sounds, I do want to say that I think it very clearly lays out our agenda for the remainder of this century. And I take sustenance from the fact that if we look at the 20th century and the rise of an unbridled, violent, and destructive industrial capitalism, in America at least, it really wasn't until the 4th decade of the 20th century that we really got serious about imposing democratic values on industrial capitalism and tethering its destructive propensities to the interests of democracy and democratic institutions and a democratic people. Well, right now we're embarking on the 3rd decade of the 21st century. We all know that time speeds up in the digital world. And I am very optimistic from all of the things that I observe that there is a gathering force among the public and among our global cadre of lawmakers to finally confront these tragedies and actually figure out how to get to the other side of them. And so I think there is great cause for optimism, even as we have pushed ourselves into this, very intense set of contradictions. Just the sheer force of having to resolve these contradictions, I think perhaps puts us in a new part of the cycle where we begin to see cause for optimism.